Spider-Man Homecoming is directed by John Watts and it stars Tom Holland as the beloved webhead. This story takes place right after Civil War, and it's a story of Peter Parker after fighting with Captain America and being with Tony Stark. He is now unofficially an Avenger. He is kind of on Tony Stark's radar, and Tony says, "We'll give you a call if we ever need you." So Peter, many months later, still hasn't gotten a call, and he's just living his life as Spider-Man. But he stumbles upon Adrian Toomes' Vulture, who is played by Michael Keaton, and he is selling very dangerous weapons, the Cheshire check that was used from the Avengers movie back in 2012. And Spider-Man is now caught in a web of problems with homecoming and learning how to deal with school and trying to be the best superhero he can while also trying to beat a very dangerous person. Spider-Man Homecoming is the first actual good movie with Spider-Man since Spider-Man 2, which I believe was in 2004. And this movie came out in like 2017. That's a long time for a franchise to be just muddied down and just completely like in the shitter for a long time. Spider-Man 3 was a very disappointing movie, and then the two Andrew Garfield movies, the first one a bit better than the second one, didn't do much for the character. And so when he was announced as Spider-Man and was in Civil War, you saw flashes of what Spider-Man could eventually be again. And with the help of Marvel and John Watts and Jon Favreau and all those people, Spider-Man is actually fun again. Now, I don't remember if I did say this or not in the first one, but I kind of wanted to rank the Spider-Men that have been portrayed so far in the movies between the three of them. And I have to say, maybe it's recency bias. I don't really think so, to be honest, but you can call it that if you want to. My list usually goes Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire, and then Andrew Garfield's my third favorite. Because the way I look at it is, Tobey Maguire is the best Peter Parker of all three of them. I think Tobey plays just a great Peter Parker, and yeah, he looks a little older for the part, like when he's in the first movie being in high school, but he plays the nerd aspect and just the getting beat down and you feel for him, kind of character so well. And then while Andrew Garfield didn't have a lot of chances to do this, I thought he's a great Spider-Man. I think that he has flares of being a really cool Spider-Man. But I feel like Tom Holland just does the best mix between the two. He is a likable, still kind of nerd, but he's not too much of a nerd because he's in a school full of like actual like nerds, kind of like there's a bunch of smart people in the school. So it's like a more realistic version than just him being like the smartest kid in like a public school, like he's actually going to like a well-educated school and he's one of the best people there. And as Peter Parker, he still does his little quips and everything, and it just feels like a way better realistic approach to him because he's still fairly young in this movie. He states in this movie that he's 15, so he's only a sophomore technically, and that just leaves so much room for him to still kind of stick with the kind of the youth side of it, and then we can finally explore the mature side of it. Tom Holland is just the most likable guy, second to probably Paul Rudd, because the way he portrays Spider-Man is just so friendly, and it's so like you want to be his friend, and with him trying to just do the right thing usually and wanting to do right by Tony Stark in this movie, I thought was really engaging. I also thought a lot of the other characters in this movie were really good, except for probably two of them. I think Jacob Batalon playing Ned, who is Peter's best friend, is really good in this movie. He's such a great companion piece, and him wanting to be the guy in the chair for Peter the entire time and then eventually being able to do it, I thought was a great dynamic. These guys are truly best friends, and he has Peter's best interest in his heart, and he will give him hard advice, like being like, you are a kid, why are you trying to, relinquish these protocols on your suit? Because I think that's, they're there for a reason. So I thought Ned being his companion piece in this movie was really great to see. And I also thought Marisa Tomei as Aunt May was actually really good. She is a step above the Amazing Spider-Man's version of Aunt May. She's not as good as the ones in the Tobey Maguire trilogy though, but I will say she is a far and away better approach to the character. She actually cares and she actually gives advice and she actually seems, relatable and is like, there is somebody like this in my family, that is like, you know, so just wants the best for you. And I think she portrays that really well. The two people that I don't really have a great sort of like stance on, at least in this movie for one of them, is Michelle, who is later then revealed to be MJ, played by Zendaya. I just don't really like her character in this movie. It's really not that engaging. And then when at the end of the movie, after she's already done this whole like semi emo kind of teen angst character with her being like, she's in detention, but she's not really supposed to be in detention, and she's just there because she likes to draw people in like upsetting situations. Like that stuff is kind of weird, and it's just kind of like, who is this chick? But then when it's revealed to be MJ, you're supposed to care because it's like, oh, she's been MJ this entire time, and like we haven't really developed anything with her other than just she's awkward. And I thought the character of Flash in this movie is not done correctly. There are things in comic book movies where you can change for the betterment of the story. There are things that you can change that I don't think really matter at times. But some things should stay the same. And I think Flash Thompson being the bully to Peter Parker works better if he's like an actual jock rather than just him being a smart kid who's kind of a dickhead. Like, I know that I stated that it's more realistic that Peter's in a more like, hyper educated kind of system, with all these guys, but it's also takes away your ability to have Flash unless you just write him a little bit better, and he maybe is getting in because he's getting so much tutoring and all that. So really that's the one big kind of missed opportunity in this movie, I think, is with Flash Thompson. I wish that was done a little bit differently. Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark is always really fun to see, and I do disagree with a lot of the arguments that people have about him in this movie, where they feel like he takes up way too much time and he just isn't like he's just too much of an overbearing presence in this movie. I don't really feel that at all, because he's really just there in the beginning with Tom Holland right after the events of Civil War, and then you don't see him for a long time. He saves Spider-Man because he has a tracker in his suit, from drowning, and then he's not actually there. His suit is just there, and he's talking to him over the phone kind of, and like it's speaking through the suit. And then you don't see him again until later on when he's on, talking to Peter, and he's on the ferry trying to capture these guys, and then he has to help save the ferry because Peter didn't weld up the ship correctly, and the ship got split in half. And then he's at the end of the movie with him offering Peter an Avengers position, and then Peter takes that opportunity to be like, no, I'm going to stick low to the ground for a while. Like, it may sound like there's a lot there, but when you watch the movie, you kind of like, he just falls into the background a lot of the times. Like, yeah, Tony is there because he's being protective of Peter. He even says in the brilliant argument scene that they have after the ferry is split in half that he was, Peter's like, if you were actually here, you would care, or you would care if you're actually here. And then he pops out the suit, and Peter's taking it back to, he's like, oh shit, he's actually here. And he's like, I did listen to you, kid. I was one of the very few people that listened to you. And now if I want the suit back because you don't earn, you don't deserve it anymore. And if you're nothing without it, then you shouldn't have it. So it's a really brilliant scene, and it shows why Tony was important in this story. He was one of the people that believed in him the entire time. And yeah, he kind of babysat him at moments, but that's because Peter's young. And Peter needs to be kind of had his hand held a little bit, because the story in this movie with Peter was not him being Spider-Man already and we just see him flipping around. This was Peter Parker turning into Spider-Man. This was an origin story for him to like be like, I'm comfortable with what I'm doing now, and I have a good grasp of what I'm doing, and I don't need to be, handheld the entire time. Whereas before, he would have. Also, Michael Keaton as Vulture is just such a badass in this movie. Michael Keaton doesn't really change his, voice too much in this movie. He kind of just like stays at this low, kind of menacing tone for the most part. He doesn't really get too much higher than just like kind of like screaming like out of anger, just being like, ah, and then tosses something down. He's just a menacing presence throughout this entire movie. And I love the presentation of Vulture in this too. It wasn't over the top and like cartoony with the whole like big sort of like green suit with some huge wings. It was like mechanical wings with jet engines on the back of them, and he's wearing a leather jacket, with the mask that you would wear if you were in the Air Force. It's a realistic take on it. And also, the big twist in this movie that I loved with him is he ends up being the father of the girl that Peter Parker has a crush on and is taking to homecoming. That shit's just really cool to see. You don't get many twists like that in a lot of the Marvel movies, and this was one of them that was genuinely like, oh wow, like it really caught me off guard the first time I watched this movie. And then looking back at it, it was just like, he doesn't allude to it whatsoever. His mystery, his history is just kind of kept mysterious, and it's just like he's always got a family to feed, and that's really all you hear. And then eventually when you get to homecoming, you're like, oh shit, this was the family. This is why Liz's house looks so expensive. This is why he cares so much, is because he legitimately has this family. And I thought he's one of those villains, much like Joker, even though Joker's kind of a distant example in a way. Like, it's just one of those examples that's like, it's kind of hard to really compare it. But in the sense of like, he's relatable and you understand the motives behind him. That's how I see Vulture in this. That's why he's one of the better villains for Spider-Man. And one thing with this story is, and first and foremost for this entire story, it is a teen comedy. And we don't really get those nowadays. There's not really many teen comedies out there. But this is by far, in a way, a teen comedy first. And I just thoroughly enjoyed the jokes that they had. The pacing was really well executed. The only real issue I had with the movie is in its story kind of structure is like, I wish it was a little bit more grittier, because in the first Spider-Man movie, we get the ending scene where Peter fights Green Goblin in the abandoned hospital and he gets his fucking ass whipped and there's so much blood and a grenade explodes in his face. In this movie, there's one death, and really there were a couple other scenes that could have been like more, like you could have done more there. And the only one that has flashes of that is the final scene or final battle that he has with Vulture, where the plane is kind of crash landed and then Tony Stark's shit is everywhere and then he fights Vulture one last time before saving him. And like, there's a little bit of blood there, but there really isn't that much. And I think that was a missed opportunity in this movie. In the end, I actually think Spider-Man Homecoming is one of the better movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think it's just so, heartwarming, and the story is just done so well with a really good villain. And I thought the post-credit scenes were really good too, because at the end you get the Vulture, in prison after he's captured, and he talks with the guy who has a scorpion tattoo that he met on the ferry. And the guy's like, rumor is that you know who he is. And because Vulture has respect for Peter, being like, he saved my life, the least I can do is keep his identity a secret, he's like, if I knew who he was, he'd be dead already. So there's some good stuff there for him, and I just can't wait to see that character come back, because one of the MCU's biggest problems a lot of the times is their villains are very weak because they just kind of out them really, really fast. There's not many reoccurring villains. The only one that was really there, and then he kind of turned into an anti-hero, was Loki. We don't get many villains that just kind of get captured, get thrown in jail or whatever, and then come back. Vulture is one of those villains that most definitely can come back for multiple sort of outings with Peter Parker. I'm going to give Spider-Man Homecoming 4 stars. Thank you guys so much for watching. So the next few reviews that we're going to do for Spider-Man leading up to No Way Home is, I wanted to do Far From Home next, because I just figured it makes sense to kind of cap off the Tom Holland thing, with Homecoming, because they're both, near each other and it features the same actor. But I actually want to do Spider-Verse next, and then we'll go into Far From Home, because it makes more sense to me being like, well, the new movie is No Way Home and it features Tom Holland, so why would we end off on Spider-Verse? And I was trying to go in release order anyways. So the next one's going to be Spider-Verse, and then the following one will be Far From Home, leading into No Way Home, which comes out this December. And I just can't fucking wait for this movie. Also, you can find me on podcast for the Andrew Paul Show. This is where I review wrestling shows for mostly WWE's NXT and AEW's Dynamite. And then we also review other pay-per-views and takeovers from the respective promotions. Links will be down in the description below for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will talk to y'all next time.